I remember the day vividly, not because it was special, but because it finally wasn't. It was my 63rd birthday. I baked a cake, strawberry shortcake, my favorite, not too sweet, not too showy, just soft sponge, light whipped cream, and the fruit I remembered picking with Daniel when he was little. I piped the frosting by hand and wrote, "Happy birthday, Mom," in red gel. It wasn't pretty, but it was real. I wore my nicest blouse, blue silk, with tiny pearl buttons that caught the kitchen light, and did my hair the way Daniel used to say, made me look like a TV anchor. A few spritzes of perfume, the soft one I wore to church, and I was ready. No one had called. Not in the morning, not the day before. I told myself it didn't matter. 63 was just a number. Not a milestone, not even retirement age. I would go to their house, smile, and pretend it didn't sting that my son hadn't returned my last 3 calls. The drive over felt slower than usual. The weather was perfect, cloudy, cool, but my chest ached. Not in a medical way, just heavy, like something inside already knew what was coming. When I pulled into their driveway, there were more cars than I expected. That surprised me. I hadn't known they were having a full dinner. Emily had mentioned a few people coming by, but that could mean anything with her. I balanced the cake with both hands, knocked once, and let myself in. Emily answered the door and barely looked at me. "Oh, good, you brought something," she said, already turning away. No hug, no happy birthday, just a shout over her shoulder, "We need more napkins." The dining room buzzed with conversation. I froze in the entryway, cake in hand, scanning the room. That's when I saw it. Emily was sitting at the head of the table. My seat, the place I'd always sat during birthdays, holidays, Sunday roasts, the chair that in some quiet and possibly silly way felt like mine. Daniel was beside her, laughing at something on his phone. He didn't look up. Some of the guests turned toward me, polite nods, a few weak smiles, but no one moved. The chair on the far end was filled. Another one had a coat thrown over it. The rest were taken. I stepped forward slightly. Daniel finally glanced up. "Hey, Mom," he said. "Just pull up a chair. There's space in the back." I blinked. The back? Emily waved a hand, not even bothering to look away from the conversation she was having. We set up a little table in the side room for the kids. Thought it'd be more fun. Coloring books and plastic cups. I stood there a moment too long, unsure if I'd heard correctly. Then Daniel added, "It's easier this way. You can sit with Jason's twins." My eyes followed where Emily had pointed. There it was, folded legs, vinyl surface, a little table half tucked into the next room. 3 toddlers were already there, banging spoons into boxed macaroni and cheese. The kids' table. My stomach turned slightly. "The kids' table?" I said, not angry, just disoriented. Emily laughed, lightly. "It's not a big deal, it's just logistics. We didn't have room here." I scanned the main table again. 2 empty chairs, one with a purse on it, one with a napkin folded neatly in the center. I said nothing. No argument, no complaint. I walked to the folding table, set the cake down gently in the middle, and lowered myself onto the small plastic chair. The children paid no attention. I didn't expect them to. They were young, and this wasn't their fault. From the main room, Daniel raised a glass and offered a quick toast, something about family and good food. No mention of birthdays. No mention of me. I picked at cold mashed potatoes on a paper plate. My knees ached from the height of the chair. Emily talked loudly about their upcoming trip to Mexico, how excited she was to finally get some real rest. One of the kids spilled juice on my shoe. I cleaned it up with a napkin and didn't say a word. After dinner, I slipped into the kitchen quietly. The cake still sat on the counter, untouched. The candles were unopened in their little box. I slid the lid back over it and carried it out to my car. No one stopped me. No one called out. I don't even think they noticed I left. I drove home without turning the radio on. The quiet was louder than any sound I could have chosen. When I walked through the door of my own home, it felt colder than usual. Not the thermostat kind of cold. A deep kind of chill, like the air in a museum room that hasn't been touched in years. Still, preserved. I placed the untouched cake in the fridge, took off my earrings, walked into the little room where I kept all the important papers. The safe opened with a click. I pulled out a folder. Inside, my will, written 10 years ago. Back when Daniel used to call me every Sunday and thank me for everything. Back when he'd show up at my door with Jason and say, "Mom, we missed you." I unfolded the will and read every line under the kitchen light. My house, my savings, my piano, all of it. Left to Daniel. 10 years ago, I thought I was giving him a future. Now, I realized I was giving him a reward for forgetting I existed. And that's when I knew. This wasn't just a bad dinner. It was the sign I'd been waiting for. The fridge light flickered slightly when I opened it, like even it was unsure how to react to the untouched cake I placed on the middle shelf. I set it down gently, like it might collapse from the weight of everything it now represented. The red gel writing was still intact, though a bit smeared. The box had shifted during the drive. For a long time, I stood in the kitchen, with the door still open, letting the cold pour out and wrap around my arms. It was quiet. Not peaceful, just absent of sound. There's a difference. Peace has presence. This was vacancy. I closed the fridge and pressed my palm to the counter. The granite was cold too. I couldn't remember the last time someone had leaned across it, laughing. The house used to echo with noise. Daniel, as a teenager, strumming a guitar badly, calling out for snacks, asking if I'd seen his black hoodie. Now, even the floor creaked softer, like it was tired of carrying someone who didn't take up enough space anymore. I took off my earrings, silver, with little sapphires, and placed them in the tray near the sink. Then I walked into the room I always thought of as my important drawer space. It wasn't fancy, just an old study with a filing cabinet, some ledgers, my father's clock on the shelf, and the safe tucked under the desk. I opened it, pulled out the folder labeled estate documents, and carried it to the kitchen table. The pages made a dry, whispering sound when I laid them flat. 10 years old, 10 years of assuming love meant security. 10 years of telling myself that loyalty was its own kind of inheritance. My name was all over it. My signatures, my instructions, my hopes, and Daniel's name, over and over again. Beneficiary, executor, sole heir. I stared at the word soul for a while. It looked strange now, heavy, isolated, like a warning, not a gift. I didn't cry. I think I had already done all the crying without tears. It's a kind of grief you get used to when someone fades from loving you into merely tolerating you. It doesn't happen overnight. It happens with forgotten phone calls, with birthdays spent in silence, with dinners where no one mentions your name, even though it's your celebration. I picked up a pen, the same one I used to write letters to Daniel when he was in college, and slowly, deliberately, I wrote one word across the top of the first page. Void. Big letters. Black ink. Pressed hard enough to leave a dent on the table below. I folded the document into thirds and slid it into an envelope. Then I wrote the same word again on the outside. Void. The birthday wasn't the first warning sign, just the clearest. Looking back, the shift had started years ago. The moment Emily moved in, I told myself she was just reserved. Not rude, not everyone is comfortable with affection right away. She didn't hug me when we first met, but I gave her space. She called me Miss Allen for the first 2 years, and while that stung, I let it go. She wasn't trying to be cruel. I told myself, just formal. I cooked her favorite meals when she visited, brought her little gifts, offered to help plan their wedding, though she said she had it covered. I even let her redecorate Daniel's old room when they turned it into a guest suite. She chose gray curtains, said beige was too mother-in-law-ish. I laughed. Too eager, probably. I just wanted her to feel like she belonged. But over time, little things began to disappear. Not just objects. The photo of Daniel and me at his college graduation, the one I had framed in the hallway, was gone one day. I thought maybe the frame had broken, but I found it weeks later stuffed in a junk drawer beneath expired coupons and a pack of dead batteries. The glass was cracked. The picture had a coffee stain. Then the holiday tradition started changing. Our Christmas Eve pierogi nights got replaced by Emily's fondue parties. We're doing something new this year, she would say, and Daniel would nod like he wasn't remembering decades of garlic and dough and laughter at the kitchen table. Thanksgiving movie marathons were replaced with Emily's wellness hikes. I brought a pie one year anyway. No one touched it. It sat on the counter beside a gluten-free pumpkin tart from a store that sounded expensive. I never argued. I smiled, made polite conversation, and folded myself smaller and smaller so they wouldn't feel like I was in the way. But it never helped. One spring, I stopped by unannounced, something I rarely did, with a small basket of herbs from my garden. Mint, lavender, fresh basil. I thought it might be a nice gesture. Emily opened the door, looked at the basket, and said, "Oh, we don't really do organic, but thanks." She didn't take the basket. She didn't even open the door fully. I stood there for a moment, then turned and walked back to my car, basket still in hand. When I got home, I set it on the counter and stared at it until the mint started to wilt. I didn't throw it away for 2 days. That moment stayed with me longer than it should have. Not because of the herbs, but because it was the first time I realized I wasn't wanted, not even tolerated, just resist. Then came the china set. My mother's hand-painted porcelain roses, thin and delicate, each cup rimmed in gold. I gave it to Daniel and Emily as a wedding gift. 3 generations it had lasted, through wars, through deaths, through births. One day I asked Emily if I could borrow a cup for my garden club's tea party. She looked puzzled. "What china set?" I described it. "Oh," she said. "I thought you didn't want that anymore. I donated it." My breath caught. "You donated it?" She shrugged. It didn't match the vibe of the house. That night, I checked Facebook Marketplace. There it was, listed under her name. All 12 pieces. Vintage set, $50. No returns. I didn't say anything. Not to her, not to Daniel. I just sat on the edge of my bed, the laptop on my knees, and stared at the pictures. My mother's set, photographed badly, under yellow kitchen light, looking cheap. It wasn't about the porcelain. It was about the story she was writing, one where I never existed. That night, I started sleeping with a notebook by my bed. Not for dreams, for facts. I bought the notebook at a drugstore, nothing fancy, just a navy blue spiral-bound pad with wide-ruled pages and a cover that bent easily at the corners. I didn't pick it because it was beautiful. I picked it because it was quiet, like me. The first entry was just a date and a sentence. April 17. Emily said she donated the china. I found it listed online, $50. No return. I didn't write anything else. I just stared at the page until the ink dried and the tip of the pen left a dot in the corner of the paper. That notebook stayed beside my bed from then on. It wasn't a diary. It was a record. A slow, careful collection of every moment that made me feel smaller in a house I helped build. It started as something to do, then became something I needed. A place where I wasn't interrupted, dismissed, or rolled over with a tight smile. Because after the china, I started seeing it everywhere. The erasure. It wasn't sudden. And that's what made it so cruel. If someone slaps you, at least you know what it was. But when they erase you, it feels like maybe you imagined it. That's what Daniel would say when I tried to bring things up. "You're reading into things too much, Mom. You've always been a little intense about family stuff." Intense. As if love had a volume knob and I was somehow shouting through it. As if wanting to belong was an overreaction. I stopped visiting as much. I told myself it was just me being dramatic. But deep down I knew it was self-preservation. I sent birthday cards. I called occasionally, though most times Emily picked up. Sometimes she passed the phone to Jason for a minute or two. Sometimes she didn't. One evening, I asked Daniel why I hadn't been invited to Jason's ballet recital. I knew it had happened, there were photos online, and my neighbor had mentioned it in passing. Daniel looked confused, like I had spoken in another language. "Oh, that," he said. "It was last minute. We didn't even send invites. Just sort of happened." That was a lie. The decorations in the photos were elaborate. There were printed programs and a sign-in table with a guest book. It wasn't a scheduling oversight. I was never meant to be there. I wrote it down that night in the notebook. May 2, Jason's recital happened. Daniel said it was last minute. Found photos online. No invitation. That same week, I noticed the couch was gone, the one I helped them pick out when they moved in. A small thing, sure, but it had mattered once. I asked about it, just in passing, and Emily said, "Oh, that old thing? It smelled like soup. We needed a refresh." I smiled, nodded. pretended it didn't sting. But every time I stepped into their house after that, I noticed fewer and fewer pieces of me. Gone were the throw pillows I'd sewn, the quilts I made, the little ceramic duck I'd bought on a family trip to Nova Scotia when Daniel was 9. Emily hated clutter. That's what she said when she swept her arm around the kitchen one day and said, "I just want everything to feel intentional." I was not intentional. I was legacy, and legacy had no place in her version of clean. Jason, too, began to pull away, not out of malice but confusion. Children can feel what they can't articulate, and I had started to become a contradiction. I brought him books. He liked them. But when I read them aloud, Emily would sigh in the background, always just loud enough. Jason noticed. Children always do. The final blow came not from something large, but something tiny. A question Emily asked over coffee one day when I was babysitting Jason. "Are you still driving?" I looked up. "Of course." She smiled. "Just checking. It's easy to get forgetful at your age." She said it like she was brushing a crumb off the counter. The next week, Daniel brought over a brochure. He handed it to me like he was offering a vacation deal. "It's just a place to think about," he said. It was a retirement community, clean, quiet, with a little gardening club, he added, as if that would sweeten the blow. I didn't respond right away. I took the brochure, placed it on the coffee table, and stared at it for 5 full minutes. Then, I folded it in half and slid it under a stack of magazines. I wrote about it that night. June 8. Retirement community brochure. Daniel said, "It's just a place to think about." I didn't ask for clarity. I didn't ask what he meant by that, because I already knew. They didn't want me just out of the house. They wanted me out of the way. The notebook grew thicker. Some entries were short, some long, some were just words. Words I didn't say aloud. Disrespected, erased, tolerated. Other entries were just times and dates and descriptions. July 4, was asked to stay inside during barbecue. Emily said I might get overheated. Listen to them laugh through the window. That one hurt. I had made potato salad and deviled eggs that morning. I left them in the fridge. No one touched them. Instead, I folded towels and sorted beach toys in the garage while Daniel roasted marshmallows and Jason sat on his lap. I peeked through the dusty window, just once, and saw it all. My family, my backyard, my food on their plates, my voice missing. And then I saw Emily pick up my old apron. She used it to wipe down the picnic table. Not even as a rag, just casually, like it was nothing. I didn't cry. I didn't go outside. I waited until the noise died down and the fire pit fizzled. Then I made myself a sandwich in the garage and ate it beside the tool rack. That night, I wrote, July 4. I am not family anymore. I am furniture. They said it would be temporary. That's how it started. Jason had just started kindergarten. Emily was working from home, and they said the guest room, formerly mine, would be better suited as a nanny's space during the day. They needed a quiet area close to Jason's room, just for a while. I didn't argue. I even suggested it in a way. "If it makes things easier," I'd said, hands folded neatly in my lap, eyes fixed on a tea stain on the dining room table that no one else seemed to see. Emily smiled. "It'll only be for a couple months. We'll insulate the garage, add a rug, even put up some curtains. It'll be cozy like a studio." Daniel nodded beside her, rubbing the back of his neck, a nervous habit he hadn't outgrown. I smiled too. That was my mistake. I always smiled when I should have spoken. The next weekend, they helped me move my things into the garage. Not all of it, just the essentials, Emily said. A twin bed, a shelf, a rolling cart for my clothes. Daniel installed a wall heater and brought in a lamp from the hallway. He left it on the floor. I had to plug it in myself. The first night I slept there, it was cold. The kind of cold that snuck up your legs and curled around your ribs. The concrete floor hummed with silence, and even though the heater clicked on every hour, the air still smelled like gasoline and mildew. There were boxes stacked in every corner, Christmas decorations, old paint cans, Jason's plastic sled. I told myself it wasn't so bad. I'd slept in worse places, hospital waiting rooms, roadside motels during funerals. This wasn't a punishment. It was a compromise. A transition. I was helping. But by the third week, I stopped calling it temporary. Because no one talked about moving me back. Emily converted the guest room into her craft space. then her home office. A month later, it became her walk-in closet. I saw at once when I went in to grab a spare blanket. The bed was gone. The dresser too. In their place were racks of shoes and handbags, shelves lined with clear storage boxes. One had a label that said, "Summer Scarves." Daniel stood behind me in the hallway when I opened the door. He didn't say anything, just shifted awkwardly and looked at his phone. I didn't ask where my things had gone. I just closed the door and walked back out to the garage. They didn't even need to ask me to stay out there permanently. I got the message. That fall, Emily gave me a mini fridge. "So you don't have to keep walking in and out," she said, handing me the box like it was a gift, not a barrier. I thanked her. Quietly. Later I bought a kettle for tea, then a small rug for under the bed, then a plastic drawer tower for socks and nightgowns. Piece by piece, I built a life inside a storage room. They still called it the back apartment when people came over. I heard Emily once, chatting with her friend by the door. "Oh yeah, Ruth? She's got her own setup. Like a guest suite." A guest. In my own life, the worst part wasn't the space. It was how Daniel adapted to it so quickly. He stopped knocking, just walked in whenever he needed something. Once he needed a charger, another time, an umbrella. He never looked around, never asked how I was managing in a room with no proper closet and mice scratching behind the drywall. I told him about the mice once. He frowned and said he'd look into it. Nothing changed. That winter, I used 2 blankets and a space heater. I wore wool socks to bed and sometimes fell asleep with a knit hat on. One night, I heard something fall off a shelf in the dark and didn't even bother checking. It was easier to pretend it didn't happen. Spring came, and with it, the barbecue. I offered to help. I still cooked sometimes. Potato salad, coleslaw, deviled eggs, all the classics I'd made for Daniel's birthdays when he was a boy. But Emily waved me off. "Maybe just stay inside," she said. "Don't want you getting overheated out here." Inside meant the garage. So I folded towels beside the lawnmower and listened to laughter through the wall. Once, I peeked out the side window. I saw them all, Emily in a sun hat, Jason roasting marshmallows, Daniel flipping burgers like he was in a commercial. They were surrounded by warmth, light, the sounds of family. I was on the other side of it all. When the barbecue was over, I washed the serving spoons and took the leftovers to the garage fridge. I sat down on my folding chair and ate a plate of cold corn on the cob and baked beans alone. I journaled that night, August 2, garage again, told to stay inside. Heard Jason laugh from across the wall. Missed it. The journal entries became less like records and more like breadcrumbs, reminders that I hadn't imagined it, that I was still real, still present, even if no one else acted like it. One afternoon, a neighbor I barely knew stopped me on the sidewalk as I watered the potted plants by the garage door. "You're Emily's mother, right?" she asked. I blinked. "Excuse me? The one who lives out back." Out back. Not Ruth, not Daniel's mom, just an accessory to someone else's life. I smiled politely. "No," I said. "I'm just the tenant." She laughed. I didn't. That night I didn't turn the light on when I got into bed. I just stared at the ceiling and whispered out loud, "You gave them everything, and now you're just a shadow in the garage." The silence answered back. I began calling it my place, as a joke. "Back to my place," I'd say after dinner, with a little chuckle, like it was a clever nod to independence. No one ever laughed with me. Not Daniel, not Emily, not even Jason, who'd stopped looking me in the eyes unless prompted. It was meant to be humorous, but jokes only work when someone's willing to hear the sadness behind them. They weren't. Eventually, I stopped coming in for meals. It was easier. No more side comments from Emily about portion sizes or about how seniors should eat lighter. I ate at my own table, a fold-out card table next to the water heater. I used paper plates so no one would ask why I was bringing dishes into their kitchen. They never noticed. Once I overheard Emily talking on the phone. I wasn't eavesdropping, it was just that thin garage walls don't hide much. She was laughing. "It's not that bad," she said. "She has everything she needs. Mini fridge, microwave, even a little heater. It's basically a tiny house." A tiny house. No bathroom, no sink, no windows that opened. Just boxes of old decorations, the hiss of a water heater, and the lingering scent of old paint and mouse traps. She called it cozy. I called it what it was, storage. One morning, I woke up and saw my breath in the air. The heater had failed during the night. I wore gloves while I boiled water for tea. My fingers ached. My knees cracked. I sat on the bed with my cup and looked at the metal shelves around me. Paint cans, power tools, a deflated, inflatable snowman leaning sideways in a broken plastic bin. I remember whispering, "What am I still doing here?" That same day, Daniel knocked. He rarely came by, unless something was needed. He stood outside the side door with his hands in his coat pockets. "Hey, Mom. Got a sec?" I stepped aside. He walked in, looked around the space like he was seeing it for the first time. I watched his eyes pass over the clutter, the pile of folded laundry on the chair, the half-eaten muffin on my makeshift nightstand. He cleared his throat. "Emily and I were talking," he started, "and we had an idea." I didn't answer. I waited. He rubbed the back of his neck. "So, the house? Yours. I mean, it's been sitting there a while, right?" I said nothing. "We know how much you love it, but it's a lot of space. And honestly, it might be time to consider something more manageable." I stared at him. He continued, "The market's good. You could get a great price. And if you don't want to live alone anymore, there's that senior community Emily's mom toured last year. Super nice. Really clean. Gardening club. Bingo nights." He smiled, like it was a gift. I looked at his shoes. They were spotless, leather, expensive. I wondered if he'd bought them with the holiday bonus I helped him save for when he was 22 and couldn't keep a budget to save his life. "And what would happen to the house?" I asked, voice flat. He paused. "Well, we could help take care of it, keep it in the family, you know? Maybe even move in. Jason's getting older. We need more space. It'd be easier for the holidays. You'd be right nearby. Nearby, like a guest, like a helper, like staff." I nodded slowly. "Let me think about it." He beamed. "That's all I'm asking." But it wasn't thinking he was asking for, it was surrender. That night, I didn't sleep in the garage. I packed a small overnight bag, drove across town, and unlocked the front door of my real house. The one I bought 32 years ago after cleaning hotel rooms for 6 straight summers and sewing buttons for a tailor in the winter. I stepped inside and stood there in the dark for a long time. Dust hung in the air like a memory. The floors creaked in a familiar pattern. The silence felt different here, not like exile, but sanctuary. I touched the piano bench. The keys were dusty, but intact. I sat down and pressed one. The note rang sharp, clear, a little out of tune, but honest. I stayed up past midnight, in the kitchen, reading the will again under a new light. Then I made a list. Not of things to leave behind, but things to protect. Melissa, my niece. My sister's daughter, she always called on birthdays. Always sent cards. Once she showed up on my doorstep with a basket of muffins and said, "Just wanted to see how you're really doing." I called her the next morning. She answered on the second ring. "Aunt Ruth?" she said, surprised. "I'm thinking about updating my will," I said, "wanted to ask you something." She didn't hesitate. "Whatever you need." No suspicion, no manipulation, just warmth. By the end of the week, Daniel's name was removed from every document. I signed and initialed everything with a calm I hadn't felt in years. When I left the lawyer's office, I held the new file to my chest like a shield. I didn't tell Daniel, or Emily, or even my neighbor who liked to chat by the mailbox. Some truths don't need announcement. They need preservation. They need peace. I spent the next 2 days cleaning the house. Not because it was dirty, but because I needed to touch everything. I needed the feel of soap and scrub brushes, of wiping away dust and memory at the same time. I opened every window. I laundered the sheets, beat the rugs, aired out the closets. I bought new towels and put them on the rack the way I used to when guests came to stay. Only this time, the guest was me. I hadn't lived there in nearly 3 years. But the house still knew me. The kitchen smelled like lemon again after I mopped the floor. The pantry shelves creaked in that comforting way when I rearranged the cans. In the backyard, the rosemary bush had survived. Weeds had crept in, but I didn't pull them all. Some had tiny flowers. I left them there. Weeds with petals deserved to exist too. When I opened the drawer where I used to keep my mother's lavender sachets, I found a faded one still intact. I pressed it to my nose and breathed in deeply. Dusty, soft. This was mine. Every tile, every hinge, every cabinet I had lined with contact paper. I went to the nursery and bought a lavender plant, put it in a small clay pot by the kitchen window. A new beginning, anchored by old roots. Melissa visited that weekend. She brought groceries and a bouquet of purple freesia. I didn't ask her to, she just did. I can't believe it still smells like you, she said, setting down a bag of lemons and chamomile tea. I smiled. I was worried it had forgotten me. It didn't, she said. You built it. Homes don't forget their makers. We cooked a simple dinner together, soup and grilled cheese. We ate at the table I had refinished with my own hands, the one Daniel used to do homework on. I sat at the head of the table. Melissa didn't need to be told. She just knew. When she left, she hugged me tightly. You seem lighter, she said. I am. That night, I sat on the back porch, sipping tea, listening to crickets hum beneath the silence. I thought about the word inheritance, how often it's equated with wealth, things, titles. But I had learned something. Inheritance is protection. It's story, it's agency. And I had given mine, blindly, to people who didn't value it. No more. The next morning, I called the lawyer one last time. I'd like to finalize everything, I told him. Completely. He asked gently, are you sure you don't want to leave anything to your son? I didn't hesitate. I already gave him everything that mattered. He didn't keep it. He didn't ask again. We drafted the documents. I signed every page with the firm, sure pen of someone who had finally stopped apologizing. 3 sealed envelopes, one for me, one for Melissa, one for the bank safe deposit box. I labeled them in thick black ink. No changes without written authorization. Irrevocable. Unless I say otherwise. I placed my copy in the desk drawer, behind old birthday cards and recipe clippings. The final page had one line that made me pause. Primary beneficiary, Melissa Harper. I ran my fingers over her name. Not just because she was loyal, not because she was kind, but because she had made me feel like I was still here, still a person, not a burden, not a backup plan, not a leftover. The next few days passed in stillness. No calls, no interruption. Then, on the 4th day, my phone rang. It was Daniel. His voice was casual, too light, too cheerful. Hey Mom, hope you're doing okay. Emily and I were wondering if you might be able to help with the kids next month. We're planning a cruise, just 7 days. You'd have the whole house to yourself. Plenty of snacks. Jason's pretty independent now. He said it like it was a favor, a reward. I stared at the phone for a long second. Why me? I asked. He chuckled. You're still Grandma, right? You're the only one they're comfortable with. I said one word. No. He paused. I heard him exhale. Okay. Well, we'll figure something out. He didn't ask if I was well. He didn't ask why I sounded cold. He didn't say he missed me. He just hung up. I placed the phone back on the receiver and turned to the refrigerator. There was a drawing of Jason that used to hang here, stuck up with a daisy magnet. I had taken it down last year when Emily rolled her eyes and said, we really need to declutter. That call from Daniel wasn't a test. It was a confirmation. He hadn't changed. He wouldn't. He still saw me as a utility, warm when needed, silent when not. I went to my bedroom, packed a small suitcase, and drove to a quiet motel an hour out of town. I left no note, no message, no explanation. I just disappeared. Not out of spite, but out of need. I needed distance, not just from Daniel and Emily, but from the version of me who tolerated so much just to be tolerated. The motel was small, the kind with floral bedspreads and metal keys. The woman at the front desk slid me a takeout menu and didn't ask questions. I took the room for 3 nights, maybe longer. Inside, I placed my suitcase near the closet and opened it slowly. I didn't unpack much, just some comfortable clothes, a paperback novel, and one old photo I always kept in my wallet. Daniel, at 8 years old, jelly on his chin, holding a stick in one hand and waving with the other, a half-built sandcastle at his feet. His smile wide and real. I propped it against the lamp on the nightstand. That night, I ate microwaved pasta and sat by the window, watching the neon vacancy sign flicker. I didn't feel free. I didn't feel sad either. I just felt still, like a woman finally allowed to rest. The next morning, I woke up before the sun. The motel was quiet, the kind of quiet I hadn't heard in years. No footsteps above me, no dishwasher humming in the background, just stillness, with the occasional whisper of a car passing by in the distance. I sat up slowly, swung my feet over the side of the bed, and stared at the thin carpet. My knees creaked like tired hinges. I made coffee in the little plastic machine near the microwave. It tasted like burnt paper, but it was hot and bitter, and that felt appropriate. I sat on the edge of the bed, holding the warm cup in both hands, and let the silence thicken. At some point, I reached into my overnight bag and pulled out a notepad. I hadn't brought it with any real purpose. It had been in the drawer of my kitchen for years, the cover curled, a few pages torn. I tore out a fresh sheet, smoothed it on the bedside table, and began writing. It wasn't a letter, it wasn't a diary entry, it was a list. A simple one. Things I did for Daniel. At the top, I underlined it twice. Not for drama, for clarity. I started with the obvious. Worked double shifts to pay for braces. Skipped vacations for college tuition. Sold my grandmother's jewelry to help with the wedding. Then I kept going. Sewed his Halloween costumes from scratch. Drove through a snowstorm to bring him his forgotten science project. Stayed up until 2 a.m. making lemon squares for his final exams. Spent every birthday pretending I didn't care if he forgot mine. Took care of him after his appendix surgery, sleeping in a chair by his bed. The list filled one page. Then I flipped it over. I added, brought groceries when they were struggling, babysat Jason every time the nanny canceled, cooked Emily's favorite meals even though she never said thank you, watered their plants during vacations, cleaned up after their dog when they left town unexpectedly, let them turn my room into a closet without a fight. I stopped after that one. Not because I was finished, but because my hands started to shake. Then, beside it, I started a second list. What Daniel did for me. I paused. My pen hovered above the paper for a full minute. Eventually I wrote, birthday cards, a dinner out, 3 years ago, a scarf I never wore because Emily made a face when I opened it. That was all I could think of. I wasn't trying to be petty. I just wanted to see it clearly. On paper, the imbalance was undeniable. The love had been one way, a pipeline flowing out with no return. I had built the entire relationship on a quiet hope that someday, he would remember all of it, that he'd look at me and see the woman who had made his world possible. But he didn't. And he wouldn't. That night at the kids' table had been the final straw, but the structure had been weakening for years. Brick by brick, moment by moment, Daniel had chipped away at the woman he used to adore. And I had let him. Because I believed being a mother meant enduring. It doesn't. It means loving. And love without respect is just a contract with no signature. I folded the 2 lists and tucked them inside my wallet, behind the photo of him at 8 years old, with jelly on his chin. Later that day, I walked to a small park near the motel. I sat on a bench under a tree that had just begun to bloom. Around me, joggers passed, dogs tugged at leashes, and a little girl sat cross-legged in the grass, blowing bubbles into the wind. I watched her for a long time. She reminded me of Daniel when he was small, when he used to bring me dandelions and ask, "Do these count as flowers?" They did. I thought about calling him. I even took out my phone. But then I remembered the cruise request, the absence of a please, the absence of care. Instead, I called Melissa. She picked up with a soft, "Hi, Aunt Ruth. I just wanted to say thank you," I said. For what? For never treating me like I was optional. She was quiet for a second. Then she said, "You're not optional. You're the reason I know how to love." My throat tightened. We talked for 20 minutes, about nothing and everything. When I hung up, I felt something I hadn't in a long time. Anchored. Not because I was needed. Because I was seen. That evening, I returned to the motel and warmed up leftover pasta in the microwave. I ate by the window again, the vacancy sign blinking like it was trying to wink, but couldn't quite get it right. I didn't write more that night. I didn't need to. The lists had spoken loud enough. The love I had given wasn't wasted. But it was done. And from now on, whatever I gave, time, effort, presence, would go to someone who saw me, not someone who simply expected me. The next morning, I packed my bag and checked out of the motel. I drove home, not to the garage, to the house, to the name on the deed, to the lavender in the kitchen, to the piano and the contact paper and the windows that opened both ways. And when I walked through the front door, I didn't feel like a ghost anymore. I felt like a woman returning to her name. It happened during a dance class at the community center. I joined on a whim, slow waltz, low impact, mostly women my age and older, nothing ambitious, nothing flashy, just gentle movement and the sound of old music floating from a speaker in the corner. I'd started going because Melissa said it would be good for my hips. She was right. It felt good to move again, to laugh in rhythm, to be in a room where no one expected anything but presence. That morning, I had just begun swaying to a song I didn't know the name of when everything tilted. My knees buckled. The floor rose too fast. Then, black. When I woke up, I was in a hospital bed with a monitor beeping beside me and a nurse adjusting something in my IV. Low blood sugar, maybe stress, she said with a warm smile. You're okay, just rest. I closed my eyes and tried to breathe through the dizziness. I wasn't dying. It was just a pause. But the rumor must have spread before the facts caught up. By evening, I'd been moved to a private room. The lights were low. I was sipping apple juice slowly when I heard them. Footsteps in the hallway, hushed voices. Then the door opened. Daniel walked in first, followed by Emily, and behind them, a man in a suit with a briefcase. A lawyer. They didn't look relieved. They looked surprised, like they'd expected a body, not a conversation. You're awake, Emily said, forcing a smile. You're okay. Daniel chuckled nervously. They said you were unconscious. We were worried. He didn't bring flowers. He didn't sit down. He looked at the lawyer like he was waiting for a cue. I didn't blink. Thought I died? I asked, voice dry but calm. Emily let out a tight laugh. Of course not. We just wanted to make sure your affairs were in order. You know, just in case. The lawyer stepped forward, opening his briefcase. I raised my hand. You can leave. He froze. This isn't your jurisdiction anymore, I said. Daniel blinked. What are you talking about? I turned to look at him fully. My estate. My will. It's been changed, months ago. Emily stepped forward. Her smile twitched. You didn't tell us. I wasn't required to, I said. Didn't think you'd be interested. The lawyer paused, then slowly backed toward the door. He understood. Emily's face tightened. Daniel's jaw clenched. Mom, he said carefully, what's going on? I took another sip of juice. You were planning to manage my assets before you confirmed I was alive. That's what's going on. Daniel looked wounded. That's not fair. Neither was the garage, I said. Neither was the kids' table. Neither was turning my bedroom into a closet while asking me to sell my house. Emily's voice rose. That's not how it was. You're twisting everything. I turned to her, calmly. No, I'm finally seeing it clearly. Daniel looked at the floor. So what now? You're cutting us off? No, I said. I already did. He stepped closer. Mom, we can fix this. Whatever you think we did. I cut him off. I did think. While you were planning your cruise, while I was sleeping beside a lawnmower, while you suggested I move into assisted living, like a couch you didn't want anymore. Emily crossed her arms. You're being dramatic again. For the first time, I looked her full in the face, and I didn't feel afraid. I didn't feel small. I felt done. You never wanted me in your life, I said. You wanted me in the background. Quiet, useful, disposable. And I played along. I told myself it was love, but it wasn't, and now it never will be. Daniel sat down heavily, like the weight of those words finally broke something in him. So that's it? He whispered. Just like that? I nodded. Just like that. Emily turned on her heel and left. Daniel lingered. He looked at the floor, the monitor, the IV line, anywhere but my face. I'm still your son, he said. I tilted my head. You were. Then you let yourself become something else. He swallowed hard. I didn't know what was happening. You did, I said. You just didn't care. You let her mock me. You let me disappear. You saw it all. And you didn't stop it. I was trying to keep peace. No, I said. You were trying to keep convenience. Silence. Then he looked up. Did you leave me anything? I stared at him. Then I reached for the bag on the side table, pulled out a small box, and handed it to him. He opened it carefully. Inside was a photo album, his childhood, our memories, the journal we once passed back and forth when he was too shy to say things out loud. He flipped through it slowly. On one page, he'd drawn a stick figure of us building a treehouse. I had written under it, "I'll always be your ladder. Climb as high as you want. I'll catch you if you fall." His lip trembled. I remember this. I nodded. That's what you get. That's what's left. He didn't cry. He didn't argue. He closed the album and held it against his chest. I don't deserve this, he whispered. No, I said. You don't, but you needed to see it, so you understand what you walked away from. He stood slowly. I won't come back, he said. Good, I replied. Not until you're someone I'd let in again. He nodded, eyes glassy, and left the room. The door clicked shut. I lay back in the bed, pulled the blanket over my lap, and stared at the ceiling. The IV beeped gently. The light from the hallway dimmed. For the first time in years, I rested in peace. Not because I was gone, because I was finally fully awake. 2 days after the hospital, he came to the house. I heard the car pull into the driveway first, his tires still crunching on the gravel like when he was 17 and late for curfew. I stood at the window but didn't draw the curtain, just waited. He got out slowly, holding something in his hands. Supermarket flowers, plastic wrap still on, the price sticker visible on the sleeve. A bouquet that said obligation more than apology. I didn't go out to meet him. I let him come to the porch. He stood there for a minute before knocking soft, like he didn't want to be heard too clearly. I opened the main door, but not the screen. He looked older than I remembered. Or maybe I was just seeing him clearly for the first time. Mom, he said, can we talk? I studied his face through the mesh. Then I unlocked the screen and let it swing open slowly. He stepped inside like he was entering a stranger's home. His eyes scanned the hallway, the walls, the photos that still hung me, him, Melissa, my mother in black and white. He hadn't been in this house for nearly 2 years. He held out the flowers. I took them without a word and set them down on the hallway table, without removing the plastic. I'm sorry, he said. I didn't say anything. For everything, he added. For the dinner, the garage, Emily, I didn't see it then. I see it now. I raised an eyebrow. What changed? He swallowed. Melissa called. Of course she did. She said you updated your will. Said it's final. I nodded. It is. He hesitated, his voice suddenly smaller. I didn't come for the money. I said nothing. I came because I want to fix this. I folded my arms. No, you came because you lost something, and now you're afraid it's permanent. He looked down. I made mistakes, he said. I let Emily push too hard. I didn't stop her. I stared at him. You didn't forget to defend me. You chose not to. That landed like a stone. He didn't argue. I'm still your son, he said, like it was a prayer. I shook my head slowly. You were. Then you became someone who watched his mother eat dinner with toddlers, while his wife sat in her chair, someone who moved her to the garage while her bedroom became a closet, someone who asked her to give up the only home she had left so he could live more comfortably. He opened his mouth, but I raised a hand. You're not a son. You're a user. He closed his mouth. He didn't deny it. I didn't cut you out for revenge, I said. I did it because love isn't supposed to feel like debt, and that's all you've made me feel. He stepped forward slightly. Can't we start over? I laughed once. Soft, dry. Start over with what? I asked. I gave you everything. My time, my money, my trust. I have nothing left to give you that you didn't already burn through. He looked stunned, like he didn't expect honesty to hurt so precisely. You're really done? He asked. I've been done, I said. You just didn't notice because I kept cooking, kept folding, kept showing up. But that woman, she's gone. He sank into the chair across from me, like his knees had given out. I don't know how to fix it, he said. You can't. Is there anything left? He whispered. Anything you saved? I stood, walked to the hall closet, and returned with a small box wrapped in plain brown paper. I handed it to him without ceremony. He opened it slowly. Inside was a photo album, Childhood memories, beach days, birthday parties. The journal we used to share, our secret back and forth when words were too hard to speak. He flipped through the pages, stopping on the drawing of the two of us building a treehouse. Beneath it, I'd once written, "I'll always be your ladder, climb as high as you want. I'll catch you if you fall." His hands shook as he touched the page. "I remember this," he said. I nodded. "That's what you get. That's what's left." He closed the album gently. "I don't deserve it." "No," I said, "but you needed to see it." He stood slowly, clutching the box like it might break. "I won't come back." "Good," I said. "Not until you're someone I'd let in again." He turned toward the door, then looked back once. "I do love you. You." I nodded once. "You just didn't act like it when it mattered." He stepped outside. I closed the door behind him and turned the lock with a quiet, solid click. It echoed through the house, not like an ending, but like peace. I didn't hear from Daniel again after that day. No texts, no calls, no letters slipped into the mailbox, not even on holidays. And I didn't expect to. Not anymore. The silence, that once felt like exile, now felt like insulation. The house stayed quiet, but it no longer felt empty. It felt mine. The creaks in the floor were familiar again, not ghostly. The tap of the radiator in the morning was more companion than noise. I began waking up early, just to sip tea by the window and let the sunlight sweep across the walls. I rearranged the living room, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. The couch now faced the window instead of the television. I brought my old piano back into the main room, even if I only touched it once a week. It belonged there, and so did Melissa. Started visiting every Sunday, same as always. Only now, we didn't talk about the past, we talked about soil, and the price of eggs, and the best way to keep basil alive. We planted herbs in the backyard, basil, thyme, rosemary. Sometimes they flourished, sometimes we laughed when they didn't. She called it therapy, with tomatoes. One afternoon, we made soup together. She chopped, I stirred. She asked about a recipe, and I showed her the old binder, the one Emily had called outdated. Melissa flipped through it like it was treasure. "This is a legacy," she said. "Handwritten love." When we sat down to eat, she didn't wait to ask where I wanted to sit. She placed the soup bowls carefully. She gestured to the head of the table. "That's yours." It wasn't a grand gesture, it was something smaller, something right. A chair that finally belonged to me again. No one had to move a purse, no one had to ask me to make room for someone else's idea of authority. It was just mine. After she left that day, I packed a small envelope. I didn't include a note, just a photocopy of one of the old journal pages Daniel and I had shared. It was a drawing of us playing catch. Stick figures, a big red sun, and under it, his caption, "Mom always throws it soft, so I can catch it." I mailed it to Jason. Not because I expected a response. I didn't. But because I wanted him to know that once, before all the distance, before the edits, before his mother told him I was too much, his father had loved me freely, loudly. Like a boy should love the woman who taught him how to hold a spoon and speak with kindness. If Jason ever asks about me, I want him to have something true. As for Emily, I never saw her again, not in person. But Melissa told me she was angry, angrier than she'd ever seen her. Furious that I'd left them nothing, that her efforts had amounted to zero return. She'd ranted about what I owed them, about all she'd done. I didn't flinch when I heard it. There was nothing left in me to argue with. You can't explain boundaries to people who think your existence is their entitlement. I had spent too many years apologizing for being inconvenient, for aging, for not adapting fast enough to their coldness, for speaking gently when what I wanted to do was scream. But I don't scream anymore. I speak clearly. I cook when I want to. I rest when I need to. I do puzzles at the dining table. I read the newspaper in silence and fill the room with music when I feel like it. I keep lavender in the kitchen window. I light a candle in the evening, not for prayer, not for memory, but for warmth. On my next birthday, Melissa brought over a cake she'd made herself. Small, simple, frosted in soft purple with little lavender leaves, made from sugar. "Your color," she said, lighting a single candle. I laughed. "One's enough. I'm not trying to burn the house down." We ate together, our chairs creaking slightly, our stomachs full. And when she left, she hugged me like she meant it. "Thank you for being brave," she whispered. After she was gone, I stood at the door for a while, watching the wind move through the herb garden. The rosemary bent gently. The basil danced in a little breeze. I thought about all the years I'd given, years where I shrunk myself so others could feel bigger. And then I thought about this life now. Quiet. Small. But real. No pretending, no waiting to be asked, no asking to be seen. Just me, just my name, just this chair. And a truth that lives beneath it all. He took my seat once, but I never let him take my peace. Some people think peace is quiet, but I've learned that not all quiet is the same. There's the kind of quiet that follows a slammed door, the kind that's heavy and tense, pressing against your chest like a question you can't answer. That's the silence I lived with for years, in Daniel's house, in the garage, in the rooms where I'd once been welcome but was now only tolerated. This was different. This quiet belonged to me. It filled the house like steam in a warm bathroom, after a long shower, gentle, slow, and healing. No one was coming in to change the temperature. No one was telling me what I should or shouldn't do with the space. There was just the sound of wind through the window, the creak of my old floorboards, the clink of my teaspoon against the inside of a ceramic mug. I made tea every morning now. Earl Grey, with a little honey, sometimes chamomile at night, if my legs ached. I never had to ask if someone else wanted something. I never had to share the last muffin. And I never again sat in a chair someone else had told me to sit in. I sat where I chose. At the piano, I played one-handed, sometimes just chords. I wasn't trying to relearn anything. I wasn't chasing youth or legacy. I just liked the vibration through the wood. It reminded me that things respond to touch, even when words fail. Sometimes I wrote. Not in the blue notebook anymore. That was full. But in a new one. Green, clean pages. I didn't use it to keep score. I used it to remember recipes, dreams I'd had. One-liners Melissa said that made me laugh hard enough to cry. Memories of Jason's tiny hands wrapping around my finger when he was born. Things I didn't want to forget, not because I was afraid of dying, but because I was no longer afraid of living. Once in a while, I walked past the closet where the updated will was stored, sealed and labeled, and final, and each time I felt no hesitation, just a nod of acknowledgement, like a woman tipping her hat to her own reflection. I hadn't told many people what I'd done. Not because it was a secret, but because it didn't need to be announced like a fire drill. It was just the truth now. Daniel was no longer my heir. Melissa was. And the house wasn't a bargaining chip. It was home. It wasn't leverage. It wasn't strategy. It was mine. It didn't owe anyone rent for my existence. I used to walk its rooms, trying to stay out of the way. Now I opened the doors wide. I let the light in. I rearranged the pantry in a way that made me happy. I put the sugar on the middle shelf, not the top, because that's where I liked it. Not because it made it easier for someone taller. I filled the fridge with what I wanted to eat. And when I wanted toast for dinner, I had toast. Sometimes 2 slices, sometimes none. And no one asked me why. One afternoon, I sat on the porch with my tea and watched the neighborhood boys play basketball in the street. Their sneakers scuffed against the asphalt, their laughter rang out like birdsong. I smiled and let the sound carry me back. Back to when Daniel used to do the same thing. Back before Emily. Back when his eyes still lit up when I walked into a room. Back when love didn't feel like a transaction I couldn't afford. I didn't cry. I just watched the sun drop behind the houses across the street and let it happen. That night, I made myself chicken soup. I chopped the vegetables slowly, appreciating the rhythm. I used my mother's wooden spoon, the one Emily said was too worn to display. The broth simmered for almost an hour. I set the table for one, linen napkin. Candle, the lavender plant still in the window, blooming gently. I ate in silence. A silence that tasted like wholeness. Later, I pulled out the green notebook and wrote, "Peace isn't the absence of pain. It's the presence of self." I closed the book and let that line sit on the desk. That weekend, Melissa came over again. She brought seeds this time, lettuce, snap peas, and a packet labeled zinnias for joy. We spent the afternoon kneeling in the garden beds, dirt under our nails, laughter in our lungs. She spilled half a bag of soil on my shoe. I flicked water at her with the hose. We were not trying to perform healing. We were just living it. When we sat back on the porch, sweaty and sore, she turned to me and said, "You're different now." I nodded. "I'm real now." She didn't need to ask what I meant. She squeezed my hand and rested her head on my shoulder. No one said anything else. We didn't need to. The garden took time. Not just to grow, but to feel like something I deserved. At first I treated it like a task, rows to till, seeds to water, weeds to pull. Melissa had the patience of a saint. She'd kneel beside me, humming to herself, talking to the basil like it was a toddler. "You have to say good morning," she told me once. "Plants respond to tone." I rolled my eyes, but I tried it anyway. And somehow, they responded. Even the rosemary perked up. The mint stopped drooping. The lavender didn't just survive, it thrived. That was how I knew I had changed. Because something delicate trusted me again. I spent more and more time in that garden. Not just with Melissa, but with myself. I'd bring out a folding chair and a notebook. I'd write down dreams I didn't say out loud. I'd hum old songs and talk to my mother like she was sitting beside me. Some mornings, I watched the sun rise while my tea steeped on the porch rail, the steam curled upward, like smoke from a spell. I never made wishes anymore. I made decisions. One of them was to send Jason a second letter. I didn't tell Melissa. I didn't explain it to anyone. It wasn't a letter in the traditional sense, just a single photo. No caption, no handwriting, no return address. It was a picture of me and Daniel when he was 5. We were sitting in a pile of leaves. His face was all teeth and dimples. I was laughing, really laughing, my head thrown back, my arms around him. I had found it in a box labeled Autumn Night. I mailed it in a plain envelope. No expectations. No demands. Just a record. Because Jason deserves to know that, before the edits, before the silence, before the garage, there was joy. That photo wasn't about guilt. It was about memory. And I wanted him to have something real before someone else replaced it with something more convenient. I don't know if he'll ever open it. I don't even know if they'll let him keep it. But I sent it anyway. Sometimes you plant seeds you'll never see grow. That's still worth doing. Melissa stopped me in the kitchen one afternoon while we were making bread. She had flour on her hands and a question in her throat. "Do you ever miss them?" she asked. I didn't pretend not to understand who she meant. "Yes." I didn't say more. She nodded like that was enough. Because it was. Missing someone doesn't mean you want them back. It just means you remember the parts that hurt less. That night I pulled out the journal one last time. Not the green one, the old one. The one Daniel and I had passed between us when he was too shy to speak his feelings out loud. I read through it like someone trying to remember the words to a forgotten song. There were misspelled words and silly drawings and notes like, "I'm mad because you made broccoli again, and I think my teacher hates me." On one page I'd written, "You can always tell me the truth, even if it's scary." That was the promise. I had kept it. He hadn't. And I'd made peace with that. I tucked the journal back into the drawer and opened the box of seeds Melissa had given me. Zinnias, wildflowers, marigolds. I scattered them along the fence line the next morning. No plan. No perfection. Just color. That spring, the yard bloomed with disorder. It didn't look like a magazine garden. It looked like something lived in, something fought for, wild, uneven, real. The bees came back. So did the hummingbirds. I put up a feeder and watched them hover, tiny wings like whispers. Sometimes I thought about what people might say when I was gone. Not in a morbid way, just curious. Not the obituary kind of things, the real things. She always offered tea, even if she didn't know you. She didn't raise her voice, but you heard her anyway. She forgave herself, finally. That one matters most. I forgave myself for not speaking sooner, for folding napkins when I should have thrown the whole table, for thinking love meant being small. It doesn't. It means presence. And I'm here now. Melissa told me once, "You're the bravest woman I know." I told her, "I'm just the woman who finally stopped apologizing." She smiled and said, "That counts." The lavender in the kitchen window bloomed twice this year, once in April, once in July. I took that as a sign, not of blessing, but of confirmation, that I had outlived the version of myself who kept giving without being seen. And I had become someone new, someone quiet, but never again invisible. The story didn't end with anger. It ended with absence. And for once, I welcomed it. There were no grand final acts, no doorstep apologies, no deathbed regrets. Daniel didn't call, Emily didn't write, Jason didn't knock with a confused expression and a crayon card, and I didn't chase any of them. That was the real ending, when I stopped needing anything from people who had only ever taken. I had everything I needed. It lived in the soil, in the sunlight that rolled across my kitchen tile, in the lavender that bloomed in defiance of forgetting. It lived in Melissa's laughter, in the tiny roots of the tomatoes we planted by the fence, in the soft music from my old piano on Tuesday afternoons. It lived in my name. Not grandma, not tenant, not burden, just Ruth. A woman with her own keys, her own will, her own table. I stopped thinking of myself as a supporting character in other people's stories. I started seeing myself as the narrator. I had been all along, I'd just been whispering. Now, I speak in the volume of stillness. I fill the room without asking. I take the head seat, not because it's owed to me, but because I built the table. One Saturday, Melissa brought over a small wooden plaque she'd made. Nothing fancy, just sanded pine and a bit of hand-painted lettering. She set it by the front door. It read, "Here lives a woman who said no once." And for the last time, I laughed when I saw it. Laughed so hard I had to lean on the wall. Then I cried. Not from pain, not even from memory, from release. There's a weight we carry when we're constantly trying to prove we still matter. And there's a freedom when you finally understand that your worth was never dependent on being needed. It just is. Melissa and I had dinner together that night, roasted vegetables and pasta with lemon butter. We ate on the back porch with mismatched plates and string lights overhead. Jason's name didn't come up. Neither did Daniel's. It wasn't avoidance. It was choice. We talked about compost, about rain barrels, about whether bees could recognize faces. After she left, I sat on the porch a little longer. The sky was pink at the edges, like it was blushing from a compliment. I heard the distant hum of a lawnmower and the closer rustle of the rosemary in the breeze. I thought about legacy again. Not in the way people usually do. Not with money, not with property, but with memory. The kind of legacy no lawyer can alter. The kind that lives in handwriting and habits. The kind passed down through quiet examples. I thought of Jason, and I hoped, truly, silently hoped, that someday, when he finds the photo I sent or remembers something soft in my voice, he'll ask questions. Not to Emily, not even to Daniel, but to himself. And maybe he'll find answers that live in the gaps, the way children always do. And maybe he'll realize that the woman in the background, the one no one talked about, was never a shadow. She was the structure. The one who made sure there was light in the fridge and extra blankets in the closet and lemon squares in the freezer. The one who kept the house upright when no one was watching. And when no one thanked her, she still stayed. Until the day she didn't. Because you don't have to burn everything down to walk away with your dignity. Sometimes, you just have to stop folding towels and start packing your things. Sometimes, you don't slam the door. You lock it. And when they ask where you went, the answer isn't cruel. It's just complete. I didn't disappear. I just stopped being available to those who treated me like I didn't exist. Now, I exist loudly, through lavender, through Sundays with Melissa, through the click of the piano keys and the creak of my favorite chair, through a will that protects my story and a garden that remembers my name. One day, the house will belong to Melissa. Not because she earned it with perfection, but because she gave me presence. And presence is everything. When I die, I don't want a funeral with velvet chairs and a sermon about sacrifice. I want them to say, she made peace look like a kitchen window and a mug of tea. I want them to say, she chose herself and meant it. I want Jason to know that before he was taught to forget me, I loved him without agenda. And I want my story to remain intact, not polished, not rewritten, not quieted, just true, just whole, just mine.